I suck at jiu-jitsu? How do I suck less at jiu-jitsu?
I guess to suck less.
The diabolical leader of the Vietnam Squad.
Hey everybody, this is Josh McKinney, and I just want to welcome you to the newest episode of the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show. So like we talked about last week, we are going to look at the Pareto Principle today. We're going to look at the 80-20 principle and how it can apply to Jiu-Jitsu. And I'm just going to give you a few different thoughts that I have on making Jiu-Jitsu more efficient for you through this principle. If you've listened to the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show for any period of time, you have listened to the Pareto Principle in action. That really was the quest at the beginning on episode 1 was being more efficient and being more effective in your jiu-jitsu training. Because I, like many of you, struggled to dedicate a ton of time to jiu-jitsu. And it was really discouraging because I was trying to compete against guys that seemed to be able to dedicate twice as much time as I did. And so being more efficient became just more important to me than anything else. And on that quest, I have referenced many times how I loved the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, especially applied to jiu-jitsu. And there is a chapter on the Pareto Principle in the 4-Hour Workweek. And so this has been applied many times on the podcast. A lot of things that we'll probably talk about will be references back of when I told you guys years ago about this idea. And so we'll just get started. We'll make sure we have some definition. How this idea, the 80-20 principle, works is a simple way that it's put often in the business world is that like 20% of your employees generally do 80% of the work. And honestly, this isn't just in the business world. This is in almost every area of life. This was originally, I think, discovered in a garden, noticing that 20% of the plants produced 80% of the yield. And when you know this, it allows you to start to dissect what you're planting. It allows you to dissect who you're hiring. And most importantly for us, it allows you to dissect how you're training jiu-jitsu. And so I thought a really fun place to start on this idea is where we left last week. Last week, I made a reference to you guys. I said something along the lines of 99% of the knowledge in jiu-jitsu is held by 1% of the people that do jiu-jitsu. And even that to me is probably still off. It's probably even less than 1%. When you really get to experience traveling and training with a lot of different people and competing with a lot of different people, you start to get to feel insane levels to jiu-jitsu. And getting to learn from different people, you'll start to see these insane amounts of knowledge that only a few people have. And there are very highly regarded teachers and highly regarded coaches that you get around. And at least for me, maybe I've been a little disappointed. But then there have been certain ones that have lived up to the hype and more. But they've also been very few and far in between. The level of like really high level jiu-jitsu explanation, usually really simple jiu-jitsu explanation, is probably 10, 15 different people, at least that I know that speak English, that I can understand what they're doing. Most of the time, we assume that if somebody has a black belt on, that they know everything about jiu-jitsu. A lot of black belts that you will talk to, and they will be completely honest with you about this, and you can test me on this and start asking, how many moves or positions do you feel like you're a black belt in? Most black belts will be like, oh, I got 3 moves. I have 3 black belt moves. And that's kind of the standard to get your black belt, is to be able to, with going with other good guys or going with other black belts, being able to hit 2 or 3 different things on them and do it pretty consistently. If you can do that, yeah, everyone's going to go, oh yeah, this guy's a black belt. It isn't this, you need to be a black belt in every single place. That takes so much more time than it takes to just get to black belt, to be a black belt everywhere. I definitely don't feel like I'm a black belt in every position. And I think you would be very surprised. You probably will find very few black belts that will say that they're a black belt in every position. And so that is to say that there are only a few people that are truly exponentially knowledgeable, but then underneath them, there are a lot of people that kind of know stuff in jiu-jitsu, and they can help you in a certain position. And so maybe they're a black belt in half guard. You go, okay, I'm going to train with this guy and learn about his half guard. And it's very helpful for you. And then you just go, well, this guy must know everything. Hey, dude, how do I berimbolo? And the guy's like, I don't play that. I only play half guard. I'm a black belt here, right? And so it's very confusing when you start doing jiu-jitsu, because most of the time you have one coach and you assume this person knows everything. Nobody else knows anything. But the truth is, even in the gym, this kind of knowledge disparity does happen. But if the gym is run right, I'll explain what I mean. So in my gym, I don't think it's 99% of the knowledge is held by 1% of the people. I think because knowledge is shared so much in the gym, I think we get closer. I don't think we're actually there, but closer to 80% of the knowledge is held by 20% of the people. The knowledge is just more dispersed in the gym. And that's something I always tell you guys about. Like, the goal of a coach, in my opinion, is to create a good enough room that it makes everybody better just by being in it. And then it makes the brand new people get to the level that they should be at so much faster also. And that only really comes from like passing the knowledge around and really making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page. And these are the things that we find that work. These things, they don't seem to work for most of us at all, right? Maybe you can get them to work. Oh, you can't. Just do what we do, right? And so as you look at that in the jiu-jitsu space, for me, like, that's what my goal is at my gym. I think that most people just don't feel that way. And so what I mean is, most white belts, most brand new people don't feel comfortable asking a blue belt a question. And maybe even the mentality at the gym, that blue belt is worried that the white belt might beat them one day. And so they don't want to help them. They don't want to answer the question. And so maybe that is why the mentality is there. But there is certain knowledge. There are certain positions, maybe 3 positions, that blue belt is blue belt level in or better. And if he shared some of the simple knowledge, some of the simple tips that he has, he would be able to take that white belt and get him so much better, so much faster. Maybe get him to blue belt level in one of those positions. And here is the compounding effect of that. Is one, if you have that mentality in the gym, then all your white belts coming up, just assume that that's how it's supposed to be. Okay, once you get good enough somewhere, you can share it with somebody else, because then they can get as good as you there, and then it helps you both. And that's what people will find surprising, is if you do this in your training, most likely those people won't catch you. If they do, you'll have a weird sense of pride about it. But even if they do, you gain a better training partner. Therefore, it gives you just like more propensity to get better at jiu-jitsu. And so, hey, Bryce, have you ever heard me use the word propensity before? I think that was the first time. Was that the right terminology?
I wasn't. I couldn't tell you.
Thanks, Bryce. I never have Bryce in studio in the podcast room when I'm doing a solo podcast, at least, and he's here. So I might reference back to him with no mic or anything, and I'll just tell you guys what he says. But when I ask him those questions, he just said, yeah, Josh, you're really cool. You always use the word propensity, and you used it in perfect fashion, just like always on the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show, where your grammar is perfect. But back to this mentality, and if you do this more, if you are in a gym that purple belts help blue belts and help white belts, and it's just That is the mentality. People get better faster, including the best guys, because they're getting good reps. They're getting good training partners. And so this is, like I said, knowing that 1% of the knowledge is, or 99% of the knowledge is stored in 1% of the grapplers is not really helpful. But knowing the mentality that starts to get that knowledge out is very helpful. And so now let's look at some other kind of just ideas on, I guess this is just really balance in your jiu-jitsu, because I didn't say this at the start, but the ideal thing is probably 80-20 most of the time. That's like a really good ratio. And when the ratio starts to become 99-1, the ratio starts to, things just don't seem to work as well. And so this is going to apply to all of the different things that we look at. But this will look at in just a specific round. And that is that 20% of your moves work 80% of the time. But this also means, and again, that would be an awesome ratio. If you had 20% of the moves that you went for that worked 80% of the time, you're like the best grappler ever. But that also means that 80% of the things that you go for only work 20% of the time. And so when we look at that, like deciding what to focus on in jiu-jitsu, this is like the hardest thing. I always tell people how important it is to have a focus, and people buy into that. It's not complex. It's not a crazy idea of like, yeah, if you just paid more attention, you would be better at this. If you just paid attention to this one thing for a long period of time, you would know it well. And so people never really argue on that. It's just people struggle deciding, what should I focus on next? And to me, there are a few ways to look at it. You can always look negative, and that's what people always think about. And it's like, oh, well, I'm getting armbarred, so I should work armbar defense. Well, now I'm getting triangled, so I should work triangle defense. But the problem with that mentality is you're only trying to like go from the very, very end of where you lost. You're probably getting armbarred because you're getting mounted. You're probably getting mounted because your guard's getting passed. Your guard's getting passed because you can't stay on top or you can't win the battle on the feet. And so there's a ton of layers before we are actually needing to work armbar defense. And so deciding what to focus on is probably the most important decision, the most important thing you will do for your own jiu-jitsu progression. And that's why it's always like people always try to farm it out. Coach, what should I be working on? And I tell you guys this all the time. Your coach, most likely, if they have a lot of students, it's going to be very hard for them to give you specifically. Of course, they're going to give some people specifically a good advice, but just to give everybody really good specific advice and not just be blanket statement. Oh, you should work armbar defense because you get armbarred, or everybody should work armbar defense. It's still not a valuable use of your time. And so if you can start to define, hey, this is what is going to make me better if I focus on it. And like I said, negative doesn't seem to work as well. If you start to look at where am I at 80% of the time, and you will find most people have a single answer that, oh, side control on bottom, or I'm in half guard 80% of the time, in whatever position. It makes most sense if you're there 80% of the time when you're just randomly live rolling to spend your time focused on something from there. If you are in bottom side control 80% of the time and then you go, okay, I'm going to work on my guard passing. How often are you even getting chances to work on your guard passing? Again, you're just not being effective with your use of time. And so that just kind of being able to hijack your percentages, being able to hijack where you are spending a lot of time and going, okay, I need to get better at something from here. This is a bad spot. I need to focus on an escape from here and go for this a lot. And I don't want to say the word drill it, but drill it a lot and just get a lot of reps from that position. You're already there. Or you start to go, okay, well, 80% of the time I'm in this dominant position and I can never advance. or I'm in this dominant position. I can never finish the guy. And so, again, you have a simple way to focus, and you're already spending so much time there. And so the best way to decide what to work on is just to define what your jiu-jitsu is just to define and say, okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is what I can focus on. And so this is what I will focus on. And it allows you to just be a more complete jiu-jitsu athlete. Because eventually, if you focus on bottom side control for a long enough time, you positional spar it, and you just try to study it, you ask questions, you learn the position. 80% of the time, you won't be in bottom side control anymore. You'll start to be in half guard. You'll start to be in close guard. You'll start to be in some specific guard that you like to play. And then your percentages are going to start to change. And you're going to be like, oh, well, 80% of the time I'm in knee shield. I need to figure out a way to sweep. I need to figure out a way to submit or get to a place that I like to go. And if you focus on jiu-jitsu in this way, one, it's addicting because you do get better. And it's noticeable how much better you get. But if you just start to like really dig in on like, I need to get better from here because this is where I'm at. And then when it's time you feel comfortable jumping to the next spot, you will eventually start to create some loops where you end up back like, man, well, against this level of guy, my guard still gets passed and my bottom side control escapes don't work anymore. And so I need to spar against this guy or get even better at escaping, getting even better at my retention. And you will find that you still there really aren't a ton of positions to work in jiu-jitsu, positions, right? Or to focus on. And for me, since I really started doing this more at like purple belt, where I would spend 6-week increments, 6-month increments, and even longer than that, focused on just one position, one idea, one submission. At points, it was even one grip for 6 months at a time. And it really let me continue to dive deeper in my jiu-jitsu. And I never was running into these places where it was like, yeah, I'm just not getting better anymore. And so now let's go to the third 80-20 principle. And this is the offensive one. Just while we're on the topic of offending people, the last 6 weeks of podcasts have come out like I recorded them all together, and then they've just kind of run. And there was a point a couple weeks in where I said some things that offended people. I believe the name of the episode was something like, "This episode is gonna offend you." And then people were still offended. It was like harsh opinions or something like that. And what's wild about it is they were offended in a way that, like, an opinion of mine could actually cause you physical harm. And so I know the lead-in was like, oh, Josh is about to apologize for some of the things that he said. No, I just want to make sure to stress this point. The podcast, it's just my opinions. I am not God in jiu-jitsu. I don't decide whether or not you get promoted at your gym. I don't decide whether or not the ref screws you over at a tournament. I don't have anything to do with any of that. And so if listening to my podcast offends you in a way that you feel like you need to comment and insult me, you can. I couldn't care less about your opinion. But that's what I'm trying to say, is if it offends you in a way that it causes you emotional harm, you should either A, not listen to the podcast, or B, look at what offended you so badly from some random dude who you've never met before giving you an opinion. Most likely, you're guilty of whatever it is you're upset about. And so that is to say, it's time to offend some people. And so the third kind of thought on the 80-20 principle is that 80% of the things that we do on the mat, just in general, still to this day at most jiu-jitsu schools, are about 20% as effective as they could be. And so what I mean by that, I know I always bully shrimping up and down the mats. I know that's always my go-to. But that's really not the only thing. Drilling moves that don't work for the individual, most of the time isn't going to be a very effective use of the individual's time. I know it's like we're in a group class and we should all be working the move. But if you're teaching triangle chokes and you have a guy that's 300 pounds and 5'4", even if he were to lose 200 pounds, he still wouldn't be doing triangle chokes. It just doesn't make sense to him. Maybe make the move work for him. Hey guys, Josh here. Just wanted to interrupt this episode really quick and tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Bryce Allen, producer of the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show. Right, Bryce? Bryce Allen is taking his show on the road. He's not leaving me. I mean, he's just doing more producing. And I just figured that there are probably people that have podcasts that listen to the I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show, and maybe they would want to have the same quality. And I don't know, what else do you do for the podcast, Bryce, besides insult me?
I'll give them better quality.
Oh, wow. He's been saving the quality, and he'll give you guys better quality too. But if that is something that interests you, in all seriousness, Bryce records every YouTube video you've ever seen of me, every podcast, what else do we do? Every instructional, all of these different things. And so he has a lot of kind of specialty when it comes to content creation. And he is, what's your Instagram, Bryce?
Bryce Allen with an underscore BRYC.
Wow, that is way too hard. I'll just throw that into the show notes. We'll figure that out later. But if you guys want to, you should definitely send Bryce a message and get him in. Right, Bryce? He's not very enthusiastic, but he records good content, right? And we are back from our commercial break. So I just want to kind of give you guys some closing thoughts on this idea and just the idea of efficiency and effectiveness in jiu-jitsu. It's very tough to just give you a blanket statement of like, hey, this is where everybody is inefficient. If there was, then I would just do that and I would be the most famous podcaster of all time. But there just isn't. Everybody kind of can suffer in their training from just the wrong mindset, the wrong training partners, the wrong team, the wrong coaches, the wrong mentality when it comes into live rolling. There's just so many ways you can approach jiu-jitsu in a not smart way. And so a big thing is if you have one thing that is out of balance in your training. For instance, if you were somebody, I gave that reference of like your mentality towards live training is you never want to tap. You always want to win, and it leads to injuries. Even if every other thing that I've ever said on the podcast you do, you won't get good at jiu-jitsu because you'll be injured all the time. Eventually, you will hurt yourself bad enough that you can't train. And so just one little thing being out of balance can ruin jiu-jitsu for you completely. Meaning, if you have no idea of ways to actually get better, you have no idea of how to focus on something, then you will not get better at jiu-jitsu. And so there is kind of like this range of having to be well-rounded to really get good in the long term. And the last thing that we will say kind of on this 80-20, and this is something we've talked about on the podcast many, many times, and this is not actually the right way to use the Pareto Principle, but I like this one. And that is that 80% of your moves would work with 20% of your strength. And I think that this is shocking to people when they realize that they don't have to use full strength on everything all the time in jiu-jitsu. When you can actually pace and you can actually decide how much muscle you want to use for something. And not only that, but so many people, they're doing a knee cut that they could do way slower and just with way more pressure. They're doing an arm lock that they could control way better, and it would allow them to finish more slowly, allow them to get more control on the person, not injure their training partner, and allow them to do it on better people because it's more incremental. It's not this big, quick movement that you're trying to grab onto. But that being said, most people just cannot remove any strength from their jiu-jitsu. It is so hard for them because you want to win, right? And you want to win that night. But if you start to learn to take away some of your physicality, you will win so much more in the future, because at some point or another for all of us, time takes away our physicality. You get less flexible. You get weaker. You get slower. You literally get shorter over time. It is not going, eventually, if you want to keep doing jiu-jitsu and keep getting better, then you are going to have to remove that physicality. If you don't do it and time does it for you, most likely you're not going to be able to do it. You're not going to be able to do jiu-jitsu. I've seen it happen to guys that were black belts. They literally start sucking. It's crazy. They were good for a really good period. And it's not even that their bodies are beat up. It's literally that they just get a little weaker, and they needed that strength forever. They get a little slower, and they needed that speed forever. And it's become part of the only way they know how to do jiu-jitsu. And so the big lesson on this principle, I know it's just like almost 3 random episodes kind of just paired back to back, how this episode is. And we'll even finish with a 4th one. But just all in all saying, it's so important to learn now to remove strength and physicality from your jiu-jitsu. The easiest way to do it, and there are other ways to do this, I think the best way to do it would just probably be to only roll at 20%, and then you'll see all these holes in your game and all these places that you needed physicality. But for most people, that's just going to be too hard, and it's going to be this ego melting experience that is just, it'll make you quit jiu-jitsu. Instead, find a position that you usually win, like a guard pass that you usually do, and try to just remove 20% of your physicality. Instead of going 100%, go 80% against the same training partner and see if you can still pass the guard. And then, if you can, try to do 60%. And most of us will start to run into problems there. That means that there are some holes in this guard pass. And you can stay at 60% and just keep trying to go until you have success with it, right? Figure out the little thing that's happening. Figure out the big thing that's happening. And then, of course, the ideal situation is you go down to 40 and then 20. And once you learn to do this with at least one move, you can start to do it more in general. And to me, that is like one thing that I can say, no doubt, with like the best guys that I've rolled with, like the top tier guys I've rolled with, is that they are incredibly smooth. And one of the best ways to not be smooth is to muscle and be really static. Anytime you tense up, you're not going to be smooth. And when you go with really high level guys, the ideal thing is it feels like they're not even trying, but they're still beating you down. And you only can get to that level by removing physicality. They figured it out at some point that, like, man, it's easier to roll for an hour if I don't go hard, but I still just beat everybody up and I just use jiu-jitsu, right? And so that is the idea, the mentality that we'll finish with. Bryce, what time is it?
5:27.
I'll tell you guys this. I did 6 podcasts over the last 6 weeks, had them all planned, ready to go. This episode was done in the 11th hour. I got to go teach class in just a second. And so just wanted to finish with kind of like a little recap of competing. I think I referenced competing a few times for you guys. And so it's always good to just say how things went. So, we had just come off of the super fight that I just did. Me, Bryce, and Ron all won in our super fight. Woo, go us. And then we went to Chicago Open. And I did, I double golded in Chicago. I haven't done that since I was a child. But I got double gold in Chicago. It was really cool. I finished a Americana from Mount, which was it was in the open class on a super heavyweight. That was cool. That was, as funny as it is, that feels like the coolest submission I've ever hit now. Just because you don't see them very much. And so then, what happened after that competition wise? Oh yeah, went to Master Worlds and went 1-1. So went from top of the world to bottom of it. But cool thing at Master Worlds, I got to see and meet a lot of I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show listeners. I'm always surprised with the belt level of most of the listeners of the show. Most of the listeners of the show seem to be, at least the ones that feel comfortable coming up and talking to me, seem to be like brown and black belts. And it's really, really flattering to me. Not that I don't want blue and purple belts listening. I know I've said on the show many times that white belts aren't people. You guys are people. I get it. You're great people, I'm sure. I'll meet you when you become blue belts. No, I'm just joking. But it's really cool when you talk to guys that you compete against and they're like, oh yeah, I listened to your show. It's weird because I'm like, oh, that's a really good mental advantage that you have on me, is that I've given you all my secrets for free. But it's really flattering to get to meet different people and to know people that even know jiu-jitsu seem to like the opinions that are shared on the show. And so I think that is all I have for you guys today. Like I said, we're doing 80-20 principle. And so how I did this one was I only prepared 20% of the podcast and then winged 80% of it. And so, that's no different than any other I Suck at Jiu-Jitsu show episode, though. But that is all I have for you guys today. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that today's episode helps you guys suck just a little bit less at jiu-jitsu. Have a great day, guys.